There was an older guy in the neighborhood I'll refer to as Mike instead of his real name, and I'll get into the why very shortly. Now, Mike was always cool with me. Mike was nice to my family. He offered to treat myself and other younger kids to the ice cream truck when it would come. He would toss the ball around with us and joke around with us. He was good to most of the younger boys. Mike was also what we called a big time drug dealer. Now, big time in inner city terms is someone who is selling drugs and they're making hundreds of thousands of dollars. This was Mike. He owned a check cashing business, a nail shop. He had the late model fast car and the clothes and the jewelry and the woman to go with it. Mike also whipped a lot of ass. I saw him do this. I saw him whip his underlings' asses that got out of line or messed around with his money. He beat his girlfriend a few times. I saw this too. This is who Mike was. Now, I don't know if Mike is still alive, dead, or in jail, but let's assume he's dead for the purposes of this episode. My honest assessment of Mike is that based on my experience and my observations is he was cool with me. But Mike was also a bad person in his role of being a cocaine and weed dealer. If by chance Mike is no longer living, death doesn't wash away his sins as a person that helped poison a community of Black people and Latinos. I'm talking about really the cocaine part of his business. I don't really have a problem with the marijuana part of it. I'm also talking about the abuse he laid out to his girlfriend and his underlings and his enemies. So if Mike is dead, Mike is open to be rightfully criticized of his days as a drug dealer, and rightfully so. In my book, he gets credit for the good, but he's also accountable for the bad that he's done, right? This brings me to the passing of Rush Limbaugh, a man who was a staunch Republican, talking head, radio host, Trump supporter. He passed away a few days ago, and people who held this man in high regard have been paying tribute to him. So let's be clear. He was very successful at what he did, which was to push a conservative, sometimes racist, anti-minority, and homophobic agenda through very wide channels in a career that spanned across decades. I say this as a guy who had no affection for him, but facts are facts. He was good at what he did. Now, what is not appropriate is to mock illness, despite him having done so towards like AIDS victims and people that suffer from disease, namely Parkinson's disease. I can separate my humanity from my feelings about a guy that was a piece of shit, in my opinion. My understanding is that this guy passed from lung cancer. Cancer is a very serious and ugly disease. Both of my parents and at least one of my grandparents had different forms of it, and even a few acquaintances have had it. So I'm not here to bang on Rush Limbaugh because he succumbed to cancer. I'm not here to do any end zone dances because of that. That's bullshit. My biggest gripe is when people who largely live lives as horrible people and horrible public figures are somehow casted as saints, which I think is horseshit. The human side of me will lend sympathy for mostly anyone who falls to a deadly disease or some other tragedy. What remains are a person's deeds. Death does not wash away actual events. So when I hear people playing politics and posturing, demanding that flags be flown at half-staff for a man that thought minorities were inferior and saw to it that it was okay to mock AIDS victims and Michael J. Fox in his battle against Parkinson's disease, and this is also a man that stood shoulder to shoulder with other races, I say to hell with them. Straight up. I refuse to play revisionist history for anyone, especially a poor example of a human being as I thought Rush Limbaugh was. It's not exactly an apples to apples comparison with using my old neighbor Mike in this story. But if I spoke of Mike in the way that many conservatives are speaking about Rush Limbaugh, which is really artificially inflating his goodness and sanitizing his misdeeds, my doing that would in effect say to all of Mike's victims, hey, what happened to you didn't matter. We're not going to acknowledge that. And that's what these politicians and former listeners of Rush Limbaugh seem to be doing, based on what I've heard. They're saying all of his unwarranted cracks and insults aimed at minorities and people affected by disease take a very distant backseat to this illusion of him being this great American or this American hero, which I don't quite understand. But that's what some people do. They go through their grief and their sadness, and then comes the revisionist history. They say things like he or she was a pioneer, for hate speech. Or they say this person was a leader and an ambassador for the right. He was an ambassador for evil. That's why I was annoyed when some networks flashed this guy's picture during the news broadcast with the soft music playing in the background. And the whole time I'm thinking, why are they doing this when Rush Limbaugh had no affection, especially for conservative media? And he gave zero fucks about them and the people that consume their news coverage. Why would they do that? Then it hit me like, oh, right. It seems like they're trying to do the bigger person thing. And I think that's wrong. It's a wrong message to send. Reporting the news is one thing. Following what I think are outdated principles in media is just really a waste of time. I don't think anyone should be celebrating Rush Limbaugh's death or figuratively dancing on his grave, but do look at the person objectively and holistically. If anyone wants a hero's eulogy when their lights are out, then you need to write those words through your actions, not some imaginary revisionist lens. Is this world better without Rush Limbaugh? I don't know. I think the media sector is. Why do we need yet another person with a huge platform preaching hatred and division, given what already occupies the marketplace in far right and ultra conservative media? I don't think we need more of that. You want to be a hero to the people? Act the part. Until then, stop with all these slow motion video medleys with soft music playing behind it for people who aren't really deserving of it. There's plenty of people who deserve it. He's not one of them.